Hello, people of the internet. My name is JD Shadow. I had struggled with doing a video like this for about a week now, and it is just simply because even though I could say something about it, what is it about the Orlando shootings that took 50 people, maybe more, from our world that no one else has said? And it's really hard to do. It is really hard to do that when you have so many talking heads, so many people who are going to say something about it, and you try to find something that's unique. You try to find something that people have not said yet. And it's obvious that our hearts and prayers go out to those people who were directly affected or have been indirectly affected by the actions of a crazed madman that did it for whatever reason he did. There's been several reasons shot out there as to why he did what he did. Most likely the reason stemmed from homophobia, and I don't know all the specifics about that reason. I don't know all the specifics about the sexual orientations of the people who were killed. I do understand that a few were homosexual, so I think that it is fair to assume that it had some homophobia ties into the reasoning. And anyone who knows me will know full well that I support and back the LGBT community, or whatever other letters you want to throw onto the end of that, since it seems it has expanded its lettering in recent months, and it's far from enough. I know that for a fact. I know that there has to be some serious talks about gun control and mental health and everything along those lines. And even though we know it's not enough, we know that there could be much more that can be done. There is just so much that one person can do from just a regular person that's doing YouTube videos. So it's hard to be able to say anything else or to do anything else beyond that. And it's also really hard to say something that hasn't been said yet. But I think there is one particular thing that we need to touch on, and this makes me kind of upset. No. It makes me very upset to see this go on. Now, what am I talking about? Now, I found something that we haven't touched upon, that not many have touched upon, about the Orlando shootings, and this is going to be rage-inducing for a good number of people, and I'm going to be talking about how some people in the media have seemingly attacked video games because of the violence that you might see in video games, and how that can influence or make someone feel comfortable in doing something like the Orlando shooting. And if it was just somebody like CNN or MSNBC or whatever else, then you can no doubt say that, hey, that's business as usual. They're trying to make a profit off the backs of those people who are dead even before the blood runs dry. And they have done that before. Jack Thompson has done that before. We all remember what he said about the Virginia Tech shootings just hours after it happened, that he said that he bet that the police would find Counter-Strike installed on his computer just hours after it freaking happened. We all know where he is now. But if it was just those people, then yeah, we could say business as usual. We can just go on with our lives and just ignore the noise. But this is not just them. This is not just the quote-unquote mainstream media. On the website The Verge, a website that has been known to provide hit pieces as of late, as no doubt granted in the past 10 or so years, the headline from Chris Plant and T.C. Stoddard reads, quote, "How do you sell violent video games after a tragedy? Pretend like it didn't happen." The whole notion is that the EA press conference at E3 did not even bring up the Orlando shootings, and instead went on with their regular conference showing games like Battlefield 1, which obviously recreates World War I with tanks, planes, and dozens of soldiers with guns obliterated one another, and the audience once again erupted with pleasure, as quoted in the article. Now, of course, this got a lot of attention. This got a lot of negative attention, rightfully so, by some of their readers, saying that they should not be using this shooting, this Orlando shooting, as a political ploy. And they responded, T.C. Stoddard responded to a particular comment by saying, "I don't think anybody is asking for the world to stop, not even us. We covered EA's announcements today because they're news and some of us will play these games. but people should be willing to ask how violent video games fit into our culture, how they inform it, draw from it, and reinforce it. Basically bringing up that correlation equals causation, something that they have, that these video game journalistic people have in the past defended gamers against when other forms of media decide to attack them on that front. Whenever a school shooting happens, whenever Columbine happened, whenever Virginia Tech happened, when Sandy Hook happened, that's the exact nature of the arguments that go against gamers, that they are influenced by violent video games to perform mass shootings like you saw in Sandy Hook or in Columbine or in this case in Orlando. But these are the people who are supposed to be defending gamers in this sense. These are gamers themselves. They should not be believing that rhetoric. As many people in the game industry would know, there is no scientific evidence to prove that violent video games would cause somebody to go violent and shoot up a school or a nightclub. Now, the other argument that could be made is that they're saying that it was too soon and it would cause a trigger in those people that were directly affected by the Orlando shooting, and it would be in poor taste to show violent video games at that point in time. And this is something that we will obviously get to, because this was not the only person that made a fit about it. Somebody who was most notable for saying something was Jonathan Blow, the developer behind the critically acclaimed game Braid. When the shootings happened, just one day after that, he said, he tweeted out, quote, "The lessons of E3, game studios are working very hard to build fantasies about how cool it is to be a mass murderer. To all the people mad at me for saying this, why are you so threatened by an obviously true statement? Like, it is so hard to at least allow a question about whether something is a good idea. Note that I have said nothing about distinguishing fantasy from reality, so please do not try to raise that as an objection. Look, folks, I am not saying anything about video games causing violence or not. I'm saying if you enjoy fantasizing about stabbing people in the neck, that is kind of gross." Now, if he were somebody who believed that correlation does not equal causation, and keep in mind that we have no idea if he actually believes that or not, then what exactly is he arguing? Well, he is actually arguing that the timing of when to put violent video games on display just a day after the Orlando shooting was in poor taste, but we'll get to that here in a moment. Roger Coleman, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, responded to him, said, "Explained, absolutely called for today," and Jonathan Blow responded by saying, quote, "My point is these games are completely tasteless during the best of times and become extra tasteless during times of violence." Now, keep in mind of how he worded that saying, how he worded that phrase. He is saying that violent video games are tasteless in of itself, but in this time of the shooting, just a day after the shooting, he's saying that the violent video games are especially tasteless. Now, the kicker came when Coleman came back saying in a reply, "Also, could you be a little bit more specific and name an E3 2016 game that you think is tasteless?" And this is where things got very interesting. Jonathan Blow responded by saying, "As soon as I start naming specific games, bloggers who report on tweets start making headlines, so I would rather not." This is all before he blocked Roger Coleman on Twitter. Obviously, a bunch of people saw right through the veil. Obviously, Jonathan Blow did not want to have a debate on it. He didn't want for anybody to be able to defend themselves on it. He just wanted to see himself as correct, and if anybody dared to call him out on it, he was just going to outright block them. And from the wording, it seemed as though he could not name a single game that proved his point correct. So it's obvious that he was just blowing hot air without actually giving any factual evidence or having any factual evidence to prove his point. And of course, there is Matt Lees, somebody who you should know as appearing on the co-optional podcast with Total Biscuit, all before major differences between the two about opinions concerning the games industry resulted in the two's friendship becoming astray. He said on Cool Ghosts, I don't know what this site even is, saying that he would not be going to E3 because of various reasons, one of which had to do with E3 being where you showcase violent video games. Basically put, he was going to use that as an excuse as to why he was not invited there, because no one's really heard of Cool Ghosts, me being one of them. Now, you could be asking yourself, why am I giving attention to these people? Why am I pointing the finger at these people? Why am I even making the video about this? It is rather simple. These are the people who are supposed to be defending gamers against this kind of attack, yet these are the ones that are joining in on the chorus. And they know it is untrue. They know what games are. They know what games are to these people who play them, and look to them for some kind of escape, for some kind of refuge from the normality that is this world. The shooting in Orlando is catastrophic. It is uncalled for. It is disgusting. Just about everybody who is not a insane prick or a psychotic idiot will tell you that it was uncalled for. It should not be in this world. It should not be something we have to deal with on a constant basis, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of anything anybody goes through in their daily lives. They do not deserve to have somebody go into their school or their nightclub or their place of patronage and shoot the godly high hell out of them. But it seems as though these video game journalistic hacks have not learned this. They have forgotten this, or whatever else you might want to speculate is going on here. They know better than this. They know better than to believe, even for a fraction of a second, that these games would create mass murders or would be in poor taste at a time when somebody wants to find a way to get their mind off of the horrific deaths that happened, or get their minds off of the horrific lives that they might be experiencing at that point in time, or the problems that they might be experiencing. They might look to that as a way to escape, to get into a fantasy realm, to be able to escape the normality, as I said. They are not looking for these as poor taste. They are not seeing these as poor taste. They're seeing togetherness. They're seeing a state of unity here. And for these people to make a political point, for people like Salon, for people like The Verge, for people like Jonathan Blow, for people like any other person who would use this, and there were many more, and I'm not going to list them by name because I'm going to go for hours if I say the amount of people who did this. It is just as disgusting as the person who did this. This should not be a political point. This should not be a manner in which you go just hours after this happened and make a political viewpoint on the back of this. The people who were at E3, the people who were presenting at E3, and the people who were at E3 were wearing those pins and those lapel pins. Not sure if they were lapel pins or they were cloth pins or something along those lines, because they, like everybody else who was there and abroad who were watching, were horrified by the acts of one person who decided to take their hatred and their loathing for whoever he was against out on a nightclub in Orlando. And for these people, the people who should know better, to write articles like this, to even entertain that these games cause violence, is flabbergasting. It is so unlike what happened 5 years ago when they defended gamers against the media, when they blamed games on what happened in Sandy Hook or Virginia Tech or Columbine all those years ago, and we're suddenly deciding that now in this time we're suddenly going to do a 180 just because of whatever reason you have, and suddenly go against scientific evidence to prove that video games do not cause real world violence, especially when you go into other countries, say South Korea or maybe even Canada, and you see the very same games sold there that you have sold in the States. And you want to know how many school shootings and mass murders you have? School shootings in South Korea, nothing. And although I'm not completely sure about Canada, it's very, very few in correlation with the stats that are here in the States. Now, as far as whether or not they are in poor taste, keep in mind how many violent video games were put on shelves right after Columbine, right after Sandy Hook, right after Virginia Tech. And you know what happened? No one complained about that, because that is not what people think of video games as. You might be able to make a case that perhaps there were little awkward segues into showing of a particular video game as the awkwardness in transitioning on the Ubisoft side, but that was about it. That was the only thing that you could actually say you might have a case, and keep my wording in mind, might have, because there's really no real way to transition from a statement about the Orlando shootings to showcasing your games regardless of what they might be. There's no real good way to do that. The shootings by themselves make us feel uncomfortable, but to be able to get together in a showing of unity and to celebrate what kind of community us gamers have made throughout the years, and to say that we're somehow immoral because we decide to be there at a time in which we need that unity, to try to say that we should not be unified, to celebrate the hobby that is video gaming, to celebrate something that does bring us closer together, that does bring us more into a sense of security, to celebrate something that lets us escape at least for a moment, to attack that, to say that we are not allowed that by those very people who are covering these sort of games, who are paid to cover these games, who are paid to write about these video games, and not only that, to be the very same people who defended us in the past against these types of attacks. It is vastly unheard of, and I implore those people, especially Jonathan Blow, who knows better, who should definitely know better than that, to please rethink what it is you're saying. You might make a taste of maybe there was some awkwardness in some of the conferences. Maybe you might be good in saying that, but even then, it was a mild issue in that. You cannot say that these things were in poor taste or that these games cause mass shootings and mass violence, because there is nothing that proves it. And we've said it countless times, and you have echoed it countless times. Now you're suddenly going to agree with them? Correlation does not equal causation, period. How many times do we have to say it? And now you're joining in on the chorus that the mainstream media has actually tried to use in order to get other people to turn off video games and to watch TV shows and movies given by their parent company and see video games as direct competition. And not only that, to make that much of a stand on it, to make so much of a mountain from a molehill that you are willing to cut off ties to close friends because of a political viewpoint that you just are using hysteria and mental gymnastics to get to, that you have no evidence to support, and to use a tragedy like Orlando to further this kind of rhetoric is deplorable. I have several friends. I have many friends who are within the LGBT community. I have several friends who were personally hurt by what happened in Orlando, and to hear these people, to hear anybody use the tragedy that happened in that city, use it for their own personal and financial gain, is disheartening, and it should not be. The people who have lost their lives in this tragedy deserve much more respect than to have somebody use their bodies and their blood in the figurative sense for political gain and for financial gain. This is deeply troubling. By making articles and by making tweets like this, you are doing exactly what you are accusing these video game manufacturers, these video game developers and publishers of doing at E3. You are actually doing exactly what you're accusing them of. And you owe those people who have lost their loved ones to this terrible tragedy a sincere apology. No one else can do that but you guys. And again, this was a terrible, terrible tragedy. This was something that should not be. This should not be as common as it is anymore. This should not be something that should continue to happen. And even though it is far from enough, even though it is something that we as people need to find a way in order to stop things like this from happening, whether it be background checks or look into mental health stability or something else altogether, my heart and my prayers go out to those that were affected by this insanely deplorable and uncalled for tragedy. Thank you for taking time to listen to me, and I hope I didn't ramble on for too much. It was just on my mind. I had to get it out. My name's JD Shadow, and that just happened.